Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. I wish I'd written that. It was Shakespeare, of course, and I'll be coming back to it later. I want to begin by thanking my sources for this drasha. There are 4 people I need to thank. I've spoken about it with Julian and with Duncan Lazarow, who last week stood on the bimah with Julian and whose bar mitzvah took place on Thursday in Australia, and with Charlotte Cramon, who stood right here last week for the Mincha service and read this Torah portion for her bat mitzvah, and with Charlotte's teacher and my chavruta, my study partner, Rabbi Yael Sadoff. And really, ideas from all of them have come into this drasha, and so I owe my thanks to all of you. The rest of it is mine. So at the opening of today's Torah portion, as Rabbi Bernhard mentioned before we read it, Jacob's son Judah, Yehudah, really comes into his own. He delivers, I discovered, the longest human soliloquy in the Torah, except for that of Moses, who of course gets the whole of the book of Deuteronomy. And with Judah's heartfelt plea to Joseph, who he still doesn't recognize as the same brother as he sold into servitude without a second thought, in that soliloquy, in that monologue, we hear and see how he has grown not only in years, but also in what we might call moral stature. The youth who was interested only in getting rid of his nuisance little brother and 20 silver pieces thrown into the deal has now undergone the death of not 1 but 2 sons, as we read a little while ago. He's discovered at first hand what it's like to be on the receiving end of being duped and deceived, just as he duped and deceived his own father about Joseph's death. But now, at the beginning of this Torah portion, his selfless act in which he offers himself to lifetime slavery in Benjamin's place to save his aged father more heartbreak is completely compelling. And Judah's story is not going to end there. Judah's story continues in a long arc through the Torah and beyond it, beyond the end of the Joseph narrative and onwards. It is this same Judah, Yehudah, who is going to establish the dynasty that is going to lead directly to King David. We know, and normative Judaism has believed, that from the line of King David will eventually spring the Messiah, the Mashiach, the being or energy that is going to make the world perfect. So Judah is the forerunner of the Messiah, the forerunner of perfection. And I want to point out that we sitting here today are named for him. We are Yehudim. We are Jews. And if that is the case, then I suggest that it is Judah, Yehudah, who is actually the hero of the whole Joseph story. It is Judah who learns. It is Judah who grows. It is Judah who changes. It is Judah who makes sacrifices. It is Judah who is going to leave a legacy. All of those are marks of the hero of the story. And of course, that begs the question, well, if Judah is the hero, then what is Joseph? Because I suggest that if we are going to measure a hero by their ability to change, if we're going to look at heroism in what we might call the classical sense, then Joseph is not going to make the grade. At the outset of the story, he is young and he is arrogant. In the middle of the story, He is in the middle of his story, and he is arrogant when he informs both butler and baker that God interprets dreams, and therefore they should tell their dreams to him. He is arrogant when he suggests to Pharaoh that he, the nothing who's just been dragged up out of jail, is the perfect person to run the country. And even in revealing himself to his brothers in that magic moment, what he says to them through his tears is double-edged. He says, and I quote, "It was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler of the whole land of Egypt," just in case his brothers were not under the impression that he has grown in stature. Judah grows. Judah really does change his character, but I want to suggest that Joseph's essential character does not change. Whatever happens to him in his story does not appear to affect his innermost self. And if we begin to scrutinize Joseph more closely, I want to suggest that there are other things that don't properly add up. He's gorgeous on the outside. The Torah actually tells us that he is gorgeous on the outside. He and his mother are the only two characters who are described this way in the Torah. He's Yafei Toar, which means he's nicely made, nicely formed, and Yafei Mareh, he's good to look at. And his clothes, when he manages to keep them on, which he doesn't always do, are luxurious. He has a striped tunic. He has managerial garb from Potiphar. Pharaoh gives him his ring, Pharaoh's ring. He dresses him in linen. He puts gold chains around his neck. But perhaps there is a vacancy under that splendid exterior. And I want to suggest, or reading the story this year, I was struck by the way that the clothes seem to operate rather like the bandages on the invisible man. If the invisible man didn't have bandages, we wouldn't be able to see him because, he's invisible. And I want to suggest that Joseph's clothes give him a presence and a status in the story which, absent his clothes, he might not have. He's not quite real. We encounter him first through those unforgettable dreams, the sheaves and the stars and the bowing, and dreams are going to frame his life and guide his destiny. There are flowering vines, there's delicious bread, there's fat cows and thin cows, and fat ears of corn and thin ears of corn, all of them symbols of flourishing and decay. And we know, don't we, that dreams are not what is really real. But his dreams often seem more real than he is. His brothers get this. They call him Baal HaChalomot, the dream master, the dream meister, we might say. And they prefer to call him that than his real name. And by the way, his name. It means, anybody know? Yosef. Give me another. It's the phrase that his desperately exhausted mother utters after finally giving birth to the son that she has been waiting for so long. But notice, Yosef, the baby that is right there in her arms doesn't exist for her. She's already asking for another one. He's an absence. Yosef, she cries, give me another. We could argue, if we wanted to, that we have here once again the pattern of a father preferring and a mother not. And it makes us think in interesting ways about Benjamin. Yosef. He is strangely forgettable over the course of his own story. The minute he's not center stage, it's as if he disappears altogether. He hasn't got what psychologists call object permanence. His story stops. The Torah cuts his story in two to include the story of Judah, who, as I suggest, is going to be the longer lasting, more durable hero. And then Joseph comes back and he succeeds in Potiphar's house, and then he's thrown into jail where he is once again forgotten, this time by the butler, by the very man whose life he saves and who he pleads with to remember him. Remember me to Pharaoh. But no, the Torah takes care to underline the point. I quote, "Yet the butler did not remember Joseph, he forgot him." Not once, but twice overlooked. Not once, but twice forgotten. And if we draw out Joseph's arc like we drew out Judah's through the arc of King David and the Messiah and us, the Yehudim, if we draw out Joseph's arc, what we will see is that he's going to disappear. It doesn't matter that he has not one but two names. He's got the name that he was given at birth, Yosef, and he's got the very fancy schmancy name that he was given, the Egyptian name, Tzafanat Paneach, that he was given by Jacob. Doesn't matter. Jacob, his father, is brought to Egypt by him, is brought before Pharaoh, and complains how short and bitter his, Jacob's, life has been. Not a single mention of the second in command to the kingdom, his own son, who has saved him, who saved his sorry Canaanite life. And we can imagine how baffled Pharaoh might have felt at that moment. Come the moment to bless children, and Jacob overrides Joseph's wishes, crossing his hands on the babies. And I want to point out there is no tribe of Joseph. Joseph is going to be the first of the brothers to disappear from the course of our history. His brother Shimon will disappear when the land is entered, but by that name Joseph is already gone. His name, the essence of himself, will vanish. He's been handed on to his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh, forgetting. That's what the name means. And what happens to his body is very curious. He's embalmed after his death, according to the Egyptian fashion, and he's placed in a coffin in Egypt. And the book of Bereshit will end on the verse that tells us that, as if the coffin is sat there in a spotlight as everything around it gradually fades to dark. Joseph embalmed is the lingering impression of Bereshit. Joseph is going to play no role in the Exodus narrative, which is the central story of our people, save as his own desiccated remains, his bones, what remains of that once glorious body that will be brought out of Egypt, his bones. That's all that is going to be left of him. He's so beautiful. He's so splendid. He's so golden. He is the golden boy. And yet, if we really look at what the Torah tells us about him, it's as if a puff of wind could blow him away. And I believe that Jacob knew that. I believe that Jacob knew the difference between Yehudah, Judah, and Yosef, Joseph. And I believe that we can see that in the Torah passage that we're going to read next week, in which Jacob will bless his children. The imagery for Judah is fierce. This is where we get the idea of the Lion of Judah. It first makes its appearance here in the blessing for Judah, where he's told that he is a lion cub. It's noble. It's concrete. He gets a scepter. He gets some solid physical attributes with wine-dark eyes and teeth that are whiter than milk. But listen, if you will, to the way that Joseph is going to be blessed. Listen. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father, who will help you, by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph, on the brow of him that was set apart from his brothers. At the moment of his father's death, he recognizes that Joseph has a separate destiny. He is the only vegetable imagery, that bow running over a wall. By the way, you won't find that in the translation in the Red Book, but I believe that the bow is the correct translation. He's the only plant in all of those blessings for the brothers. And he's blessed with these infinite things, heaven above, the primordial deep that it was believed in ancient cosmology vibrated underneath the earth that we stand on. Blessings of breasts and of womb, feminine blessings. And I think that in this blessing lies the key to Joseph's real function in the story in which, as I've argued, he's the protagonist, but he's not the hero. And I want to say here that nothing that I have said in displacing him from the role of hero and placing him instead as protagonist, which is where I think he belongs, nothing is intended to disparage him. On the contrary, Joseph's function in the story is as vital as the function of Judah. His story is not that of the typical hero. He's there and he's gone. He's there and he's gone again. But I think that is precisely the point, because what Joseph represents, what Joseph embodies, is precisely what can't last. Joseph is the paradigm of beauty. Joseph is the paradigm of beauty, and it is impossible for human beings to live without beauty. We're born with an instinct for what is rhythmic and what is harmonious and what is balanced. And I spent quite a bit of time researching this. I'm not going to bore you with my research, but I found to my delight that Abraham Maslow, the psychologist who created the hierarchy of human needs, Maslow later added another quality to his pyramid, the need for aesthetic beauty. He says that a human being cannot flourish without a sense and an understanding and an appreciation for what is beautiful. Because think for a moment about how a human being reacts to the beautiful. We may gasp, we may laugh, we may weep, and the memory of a single moment of beauty can sustain us even through the darkest moments of our lives. And isn't that what Joseph is really about? His gorgeousness, the splendor of his clothing, the rainbow of colors that seems to surround him, the blessing that speaks of what is extraordinary and feminine and sublime, his apparent amorality, his unchanging character, doesn't matter. It's not the point of beauty to change. It is the point of beauty to be beautiful. And he slips through his story, somehow avoiding definition. First here, then gone, then here again. Everything about him bespeaks beauty. And beauty has to die. Beauty cannot last. It is in the nature of beauty to be ephemeral. As so beautifully expressed, I'm sorry, I wanted to cut the quotes, but I can't. This has to come in. John Keats, the English poet John Keats. Keats, who died of tuberculosis at the tragically early age of 26 in a villa on the Spanish steps in Rome, and whose tombstone reads at his own wish, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." It's Keats who gets it. He writes, "He dwells with beauty, beauty that must die, and joy, whose hand is ever at his lips bidding adieu." Joseph is written in water too. He's written in the water of the deep, as his father points out in his blessing. And it doesn't matter that Joseph is ephemeral. It doesn't matter that he's just passing through. It doesn't matter that he's a dreamer. It doesn't matter that he's not as real as Judah, who is going to march forward out of the story, carrying our destiny on his back. Permanence is not the point. Joseph is there to inspire us. Joseph is there to make us catch our breath and bring tears to our eyes and bring hope to our hearts. And that's why his bones are brought out of Egypt, because even the remnants of something that is beautiful can still inspire us, can still move us long after it has decayed. And that brings me back once again to where we began, with the words of Prospero, the magician protagonist of Shakespeare's exquisite play, The Tempest, in which, like Joseph, nothing is entirely real and it doesn't matter. I'm going to read them again, and we might think of them also as Joseph's epitaph. Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. It is a perfect epitaph for Joseph. Joseph the beautiful, Joseph the ephemeral, Joseph the mercurial, Joseph who will soon leave our stage and our history to his brother Judah, but who is as vital to the story as Judah is. For who among us, any of us, can live without beauty? Who of any of us can live without a dream? Shabbat Shalom.